RPGs, or role-playing games, are an ever-growing category, and it was a good year in 2019. Here are 10 of our picks of the best RPGs of 2019. Now, keep in mind, this is our picks, gameranx's personal picks. There are tons of nuances to what makes a game an RPG, so we're looking forward to hearing your personal choices down in the comments. But let's get started off with number 10, and talk about my time at Portia. Yes, that's actually apparently how the game is pronounced. The elevator pitch for this game is basically a weirder 3D Stardew Valley with a lot more elements plopped in. There's more crafting, there's building, there's taking care of lots of things like friends and animals and growing crops and doing activities in a town. There's a nice emphasis on exploration, and there's stats to build your character in social, combat, and crafting. It kind of surprised a lot of people, and it's found a big audience on PC especially, and for good reason. It's cutesy, yeah, but it's engaging. And if you're into anything from Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing or maybe something like Dragon Quest Builders, you should consider my time at Portia too. Now, over at number 9, we have The Division 2. This is always a weird one for us to consider as an RPG. I don't know why, but it is, literally an RPG. You create a character, you grind for better gear, and you dump XP points into a pretty big skill tree. So yeah, technically it's an RPG. One standout thing from this game is that it was way more single-player oriented than the previous, which really was appreciated. It had a longer than expected campaign for a games as a service type thing. That's awesome, because that's usually half-assed. Look at the Destiny campaigns. Yeah, they're fun and all, but they're also pretty short. Shooting dudes in this game also feels really nice, even though, yes, still, it can get kind of weird unloading 8 clips into a garbage man at times. After beating the campaign, you unlock a new weapon and a new skill tree to dump points into and build out as well, so there's a lot of RPG stuff going on here, and there's a lot to play through. Now, moving on over to number 8, we have Remnant from the Ashes. This one we really liked over here, mostly because it was just pretty different. It was like a Dark Souls-like RPG, but instead of melee combat, it was a third-person shooter. There's also looter-shooter mechanics and roguelike elements as well. Each playthrough is different because the map is randomly generated. With certain dungeons, maybe, an enemy not even spawning might cause you to miss out on a gun unless you jump into someone else's world, of course, which is probably the coolest part of the game. Being able to jump into someone else's world and fight a boss that never really spawned in your game, or even get a weapon that just didn't show up for you either. The RPG elements here were just solid as well, like with there being some really cool builds with certain weapon mods that you could toss on guns to make them work better with your character role. Now, it wasn't too intense and intricate as well, which is something I appreciate. It was a nice mix. Not every RPG has to be a huge, massive skill tree with all these build options. Sometimes something simple is just as fun, and Remnant is a perfect example of that. Now, over at number 7, we have Outward, a game that we've been talking about more recently because, to be honest, we kind of missed the boat on it when it first launched. A lot of people had asked us to cover it in videos, maybe do it before you buy, and we never got around to it, and that's unfortunate because when we finally did, it turns out Outward is a really compelling RPG. You make a character, you venture out into a very harsh world with mystical creatures, magic, swords, and lots of things to manage. The game is actually a little hardcore with how it handles death, or lack thereof, and managing sleeping and taking care of yourself, and it was surprisingly satisfying and pretty underrated. It also can be played completely cooperatively, which is really impressive for a game of this caliber, and it is totally worth pointing out. But since we are talking about RPGs with cooperative elements, we gotta talk about another one that has that, and that's Code Vein. Now, Code Vein, as you've probably heard, is very much a Dark Souls-like inspired game. I've seen some people throw around the term like rip-off and clone, but I do really think what Code Vein brings to the table is some good old anime goodness. I don't know, from building a character from the ground up, your own ideal, cool-looking character, to the actual story itself, Code Vein is actually very unique. You're in this post-apocalyptic world, and you're technically a vampire, and the game really embraces that from your abilities and to just how you build out your character. But I was just a big fan of the weapon types. You can fight with a gun with a bayonet, the heavy weapons are really over the top, and this game had kind of been delayed and kind of pushed under the rug for so long, but I'm glad it finally released and is in a pretty solid state, because frankly, it's pretty decent. If you like these types of RPGs, like if you do like a Souls-like game, but if you really like anime, you definitely should consider Code Vein. Next at number 5, Greedfall. It was a really nice surprise for the third-person Western RPG style, one that I don't think often gets enough love. It sets you as a neutral party in a world of conflict. There is an empire with settlers coming to a new world, and they've settled a colony, while problems are brewing with the local people who have lived there for centuries. Now, I'm glossing over a lot of it. It is very story-heavy and character-centric, but it's kind of like England's establishments in the New World with the 13 colonies and all that history stuff, but with a nice fantasy twist. In this world, there's a mysterious weird plague, there's magic, and lots of fantastical, over-the-top looking creatures. You drop into this world and explore its various locations that aren't quite open world, and you build out your character in typical RPG fashion with skill trees and some cool loot and armor where you can actually keep one piece of armor and then add stuff on top of it instead of just tossing it aside for the next new thing. It's satisfying, and really, Greedfall exists as one of those fun B-tier games. Not super expensive, high-budget AAA, but not really an indie game either. It's got a lot of charm to it, and if you like these types of games, you should absolutely consider it. Now, over at number 4, Disco Elysium. This one is notable because it gets right to the core of that hardcore RPG genre. The game sees you taking the role of a detective in the fictional city of Remnant, sent to investigate a mysterious murder, who then goes on a drinking binge and wakes up 3 days later in a hotel room with no memory of what he was doing prior, and it's up to you to take it from there to solve the murder and recover your memory. It's got a unique approach to character interaction, forgoing traditional combat mechanics and instead going with an approach that focuses on dialogue and decision making, with the outcomes determined through the navigation of dialogue trees and skill checks rather than shooting a dude with a gun and hoping it has a crit. Since so much importance is placed on dialogue and character interactions over combat, the writing in Disco Elysium goes far above what we've come to expect for video game writing these days, with characters feeling incredibly fleshed out and some real good dialogue and decisions that let you really feel like you're an active part of the story and not just an observer tapping buttons and watching how they play out on screen. It's great to see a new and interesting take like this, especially considering how rigidly a lot of PC RPGs, they adhere to that classic D&D style fantasy RPG. So seeing a game like Disco Elysium mix up that formula with its mechanics and then set it all in a cool 70s sci-fi aesthetic, it's just refreshing, and we definitely think it's worth checking out if you haven't already. Now over to number 3, of course, Borderlands 3. Now, Borderlands 3 is definitely just more Borderlands, and we mean that in the best possible way. Everything that made the previous Borderlands games such big hits is present here and improved upon in a lot of really cool ways. Yeah, you're still gunning down hordes of enemies over and over and over again in search of better and rarer weapons, but that's a big part of the appeal. The game saw 4 new classes, a ton of quality of life changes like the ability to mantle upon objects, alt fire on a lot of weapons in a fun way, adjusted loot drops when playing with people of different levels, just refined gunplay overall, and all of that kind of came together to make a really fun game to just hunker down with and binge for hours on end, especially when playing online with a full squad. Now, all of the new character classes feel pretty unique and interesting, and you can spec them all out to be completely different, or you can plan ahead too and spec your characters to all complement each other so you can really crush it with some pretty good coordinated attacks, which only makes the multiplayer that much more fun. We said it at the start, it's better with friends. And like we've also said, it's not reinventing the wheel, but for a series that's now a decade old, it does just enough to stay fresh and relevant and to still stand out in a world where looter shooters have become more of the norm, which says a lot about the game if you ask us. But down to number 2, we have Fire Emblem, 3 Houses. This is definitely making Fire Emblem fans happy. It's a satisfying character-based RPG strategy tactics hybrid that you kind of come to expect from the series, and they took it to new heights from a graphics and presentation standpoint here. It's a very long, engaging game that can be very challenging, but ultimately pretty rewarding, especially if you get invested in the characters and their houses. It seems like a lot of people did just that, because for a while, it felt like all you'd hear about online was the House of Golden Deers, the Blue Lions, and the Black Eagles. It felt like a pop culture moment, like a phenomena, and it was really cool because it was the first mainline new Fire Emblem on Nintendo Switch, and therefore it was a lot of people's first exposure to the franchise. And it worked out well because it's a great game. But finally, of course, down to number 1, we have The Outer Worlds. Now, what can we say about The Outer Worlds? This was developed by now legendary RPG developers Obsidian, the people behind the South Park RPGs, the kick-ass Pillars of Eternity, and of course, Fallout New Vegas. It absolutely shows here. The Outer Worlds, it feels in a lot of ways like a great spiritual successor to Fallout New Vegas. It's an RPG-heavy first-person game, but it's set in space. A new and exciting and, frankly, kind of depressing corporately controlled universe filled with great cynicism and lots of satire. But the biggest thing is its depth of gameplay systems and pretty immense character building. There's so much freedom in your choices. Creep around as a hacker, be a scientist, a brutal soldier, or a gunslinger, or just maybe a slick, smooth talker, or a corporate guy, somewhere in between. The game just feels so well designed to handle whatever the hell your weird character is, and whether it's social stuff, stealth, or an in-between, from a gameplay mechanic, it all feels fun and well thought out. It's not the longest RPG, but it's certainly replayable thanks to all the dumb shenanigans you can engage in. You can kill whatever you want, whoever you want, do whatever you want, and the game just keeps going and just rolling with it. It's a marvel of an RPG, and you should have it on your radar if you didn't already. Those are our favorite RPGs, but of course we got some bonus ones for you because so many games released this year. First we have the Surge 2, which is more Surge, and it's very satisfying. We also have Pokemon Sword and Shield, which some fans are loving and many fans are hating, but we wanted to include it here. We also have Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, which is sort of an RPG. The developers have said that it's an action-adventure game, not an RPG, but I kind of feel like it's a little bit of an RPG. And of course, Children of Morta. Now, all of these games we think are worth at least checking out, taking a look at. But of course, the magic is also you guys out there, so we want to hear your own personal RPG list down in the comments. Any of your favorite games, be sure to let us know. And if you enjoyed this and maybe, we put a new game on your radar, clicking the like button is the best way you can show your appreciation and help us out. Thank you. But if you're new, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell because we put out new videos every single day. Either way, as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.